want to welcome you all to this kind of reboot of our ecosystem kind of huddle and meeting. As we mentioned a few months ago, we were kind of looking at different formats and different event series that we could really use to engage this community, and so this is what we've landed on. I'm so excited to introduce Janet and have her kick off this new series around talent, tech, and capital. And these are the kind of three pillars that we think really resonate with this community, with the entrepreneurs and the partners that we serve. And so without further ado, Janet will do a kind of intro in terms of her background, but she, just very humbly, she is the most humble and modest person. If you haven't met her before, she really doesn't talk the way her experience talks, and she's a real trailblazer, and I'm embarrassing her now. So with that, I am going to hand it over. And Jeremy Laurin, who all of you guys know, sends his apologies from the Hill. I am doing my best to step in for him, but he is up in Ottawa today at a caucus meeting talking about innovation and technology, and so I think that's a great thing for this ecosystem, so stepping into his big shoes. But without that, Janet, thank you so much for coming.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Can everybody hear me okay? Is there an echo or anything? Okay. So, yeah, I thought maybe what would make the most sense, if you want, I can tell you a little bit about my background, about what I do, about Real Ventures, and then about what we look for in terms of our portfolio companies, and then would love to open it up and have a couple of questions, and frankly, whatever you guys want to talk about, I am game to talk about. So, first of all, in terms of my background, I'm a Toronto, Greater GTA native, and grew up here. Actually started my first business when I was 15 years old. Selling muffins to retailers up and down Yonge Street, waking up at 1 o'clock in the morning and making about 30 dozen muffins in our kitchen and then delivering them on my bicycle. So that was my first experience in business and in entrepreneurship. I went to University of Western Ontario in business, and then after graduating joined Procter & Gamble. So did sort of classic consumer marketing for 4 years. I then went to McKinsey & Company, where I worked as an engagement manager and management consulting, and did a bunch of very interesting projects, really all around the world in a bunch of different functional areas. And then I decided that I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial, and this was 1999, I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial. And I also wanted a bit of an adventure for my life. I had sort of grown up and lived in the GTA for most of my life, and I thought, you know what, I think it'd be really interesting to go to the States. And so I thought, why don't I see if I can move to Silicon Valley? As I said, this was 1999, and there were a lot of amazing tech entrepreneurs and amazing fast-growing companies coming from the Silicon Valley area. So I thought, okay, that would be like a good life adventure. I think I'd learn a lot. But I knew nobody in Silicon Valley. So I thought, okay, what am I going to do? So I thought, okay, I will to be most efficient, I'll do sort of a one-to-many approach. I will contact some venture capitalists there, since that's more efficient. I'll contact some venture capitalists who will have a portfolio of companies, and maybe they can direct me to the right company. And so I simply, went online, researched, hey, here are the top 10 most respected VCs in the Silicon Valley, and then for each one I looked at the partners and tried to find somebody that might be able to relate to me. And one of the firms was a firm called Benchmark Capital, and there was a partner there named Bob Cagle, whose background was consumer packaged goods and management consulting. So I thought, maybe he'll relate to me. So I sent him an email and didn't hear back. So I sent him another email, didn't hear back. So I phoned him up, and finally after probably about 7 or 8 messages and phone calls, his assistant called me up and said, okay, Janet, Bob has got all your messages. He has nothing for you. There is nothing in his portfolio, the companies that would be applicable to you. I said, oh, okay. But she said, probably thinking that this girl's never going to be in town, she said, but you know what, if you're ever in Silicon Valley, let me know, and I can schedule a half-hour meeting with you and Bob. So I said, okay. So then I called her up a week later, and I said, you know what, I happen to be in Silicon Valley next week, and was wondering if I could come and meet with Bob. And so she said, okay. So she set it up, and I thought, okay, now I got a meeting with this guy, I better find out a little bit more about him. So then I proceeded to do more research and found out that he was a legend in Silicon Valley. A whole book had been written about him, and I thought, oh my gosh, thank goodness I did not know that, or else I would never have had the nerve to be phoning up and say, hey Bob, it's Janet Bannister calling. So a good little life lesson that sometimes what you don't know, actually, it can help you. Anyways, I went and met with him. We had a great meeting. He said, you know what, Janet, you should join eBay. He was one of the initial investors in eBay. And so he said, you should join eBay. eBay's growing super fast. They're always looking for more people to join them. So he said, how long are you in town? And I said, oh, another couple of days. So he said, well, we have a board meeting tomorrow. I'm going to tell Meg Whitman, who was CEO of eBay at the time, now she's CEO of HP. He said, I'm going to tell Meg that she needs to meet with you before you leave town. So I said, okay. So then the next day, I was actually at a conference that would happen to be going on there, and the voice at the other, and my cell phone rang, and the voice at the other end said, hey Janet, this is Meg Whitman, and I just got out of a board meeting, and I talked to Bob Cagle, and I understand I have to meet with you, and you're only in town for a couple of days. Can you come over to our office right now? I said, sure. So I hopped in my little rental car and I drove over to the office in San Jose and I met with her. And long story short, a couple months later, I ended up moving down to Silicon Valley and joined eBay. And when I joined eBay, about 90% of the things bought and sold on eBay were collectibles. So the coins, stamps, that sort of thing. And I was given responsibility for the non-collectibles categories. So clothing, home and garden, jewelry, books, etc. And so over the next 3.5 years that I spent in Silicon Valley, I grew those categories, basically tripling or quadrupling them every year, year over year, and helped to transition eBay into a much more mainstream marketplace. So it was a fantastic opportunity of learning about entrepreneurship, just being immersed in the Silicon Valley culture and a fast growing. So amazing opportunity that I felt very lucky to have been a part of. I then my husband is from Canada, and we wanted to move back to Canada just to be long-term, to be closer to our family, and we wanted to have our family here. And it was interesting, living in Silicon Valley, I actually became a much more loyal, patriotic Canadian. And I think sometimes, when you go away from where you are, you actually become, you realize how special Canada is as a country when you live somewhere else. So I wanted to come back. So I talked to eBay and I said, hey, I want to move back to Canada. My husband and I want to move back. And so they said, okay, that's great. If that's what you want to do, we'll be very supportive. We will transfer you back. But the only role that they had available in Canada was head of product. So basically responsible for the ebay.ca website, which I thought, oh, I really don't want to do that. But I guess if that's my ticket home, sure, I'll do that. And once I get back to Canada, I'll figure out what I'm going to do. So I moved back with eBay and actually moved back in January, and people were like, are you crazy? You moved from California to Canada in January? Did you know it was going to snow here? It's like, yes, I know it was going to snow here. Anyways, moved back to Canada, responsible for the ebay.ca website. First thing I did was I benchmarked. I said, hey, how is Canada doing versus every other country in the world? And what I realized was that Canada was doing a great job of actually getting people to the website, but we were not doing a good job of actually converting those visitors to actually do something online. We were actually half of every other country around the world in terms of our ability to convert those visitors to actually do something. So I started doing some research and some thinking and realized that in Canada as a whole, Canadians spend a ton of time online, research online, but they are very reluctant to actually complete the transaction online. And those dynamics still hold true to today, where e-commerce shopping in Canada is about half that as the US, whether you look at it on a per capita basis or a percent of retail spending. So I thought, okay, given those dynamics, maybe there would be a better model that would work in Canada. And after sort of coming up with 4 or 5 different models, whittling it down, I thought, we should be launching a classified site in Canada. That just makes more sense. You research online, you transact in person. Canada is one of the most urbanized countries with over 80% of our population living in urban areas. And if you're going to do a local classified site, that you need people in the same city. So basically proposed to the management at eBay in Silicon Valley that we should do this. And everybody said, no, that's a crazy idea. it's never going to work. Don't you know that Craigslist is there? And this is a marketplace business, first mover advantage, the market's over. Anyways, again, long story short, I was able to persuade them to let me launch it in Canada. I said, I don't need any money. I don't need any budget. There was a classifieds product that was about to launch in Europe. I said, all I need is I'm going to take that. I can localize it for Canada, and I'll just basically run it as a side job. So hence Kijiji was launched in Canada, and initially it was just me, and then I did a small SEM paid search campaign. And I remember the first one I was just putting on my personal credit card, and I thought, somehow I'll expense this, and because I have no idea how to set up a proper purchase order and a budget, so I'll just put it on my personal credit card, do some marketing, and I'm sure the company will reimburse me somehow. So that was sort of my first entry into, and we launched Kijiji, and it became a success, and a whole other story there. But anyways, it was quite successful. Then I was at Kijiji, meanwhile, launching in other countries around the world, and so I headed the global Kijiji business as well. So great experience there. And then I decided to leave Kijiji. I actually had a young child at home, was traveling all over the world. So I left, took some time off, then ran my own consulting business, was CEO of a small startup company. And then the team at Real Ventures contacted me just over 3 years ago. So for the last 3 years, I've been a partner of Real Ventures. Real Ventures is an early stage venture capital firm. We're actually the largest, most active early stage venture capital firm in Canada. We were founded 10 years ago. We've invested in over 100 companies. The firm was founded in Montreal by 3 partners who are still there. I was the first partner hired in Toronto. I have absolutely loved being in venture capital. I feel that I am so lucky to wake up and do what I do every day. I have led the investments in about a dozen companies, and right now I sit on the board of 14 young companies.
It's crazy.
Yeah, so it's sort of busy, but I love it. I really love it. Most of the companies are, I have one company is in San Francisco, one in Vancouver, one in Montreal, one in Ottawa, and the rest in the GTA. But in terms of, a lot of people ask me, okay, what does Real Ventures invest in? How do I know when my company is ready for investment? So we have now, we are seed stage investors, and we define seed as when a company is raising between $1 and $3 million. That's generally our sweet spot, where we will invest between, generally speaking, sort of $750,000 and $2 million into a company, and then we typically take a role on the board, and then we work very closely with that company to help them go from seed to Series A. And so our model is all about how do we get a company and take them from a seed investment until they're Series A ready, and then we help them raise a Series A round from the best partners available. And then we will continue to invest, and we typically invest in their Series A and their Series B round, but we help them find the best partner to lead those rounds, generally speaking. In terms of how do you know when you're venture ready, or when are you ready, I think of it in terms of 3 things that I think most venture capitalists look for, or investors in general. One is team, one is traction, and the other is vision. So, the first thing is team, I'll talk a little bit about. And so we, as I said, we are early stage investors. We tend to be the first institutional investors. Often they've raised sort of some friends and family money, but then we're the first institutional investors. We invest in a fair number of teams that are, right out of university. And we also invest in entrepreneurs who are, frankly, in their 50s. We have one CEO who I think is 65-ish. So we really invest in a wide range of ages with all sorts of different experiences. The most important thing to us is the tenacity of the entrepreneur, the willingness to figure it out, to make progress quickly with limited resources, to learn from their mistakes, to keep at it. I think it's those sorts of things, as well as an understanding of their market and a unique insight or a unique way of tackling the business. Is that sort of, and the ability, I would add the other thing, is the ability to attract great people. We invest, as I said, a team is a huge component, and we invest in, when we make an investment, in the CEO, we are backing that CEO, those founders. We will never invest in a company and say, oh, we don't really like the CEO, no problem, we'll invest and swap out the CEO. No, we are investing in that CEO, and we anticipate that, yes, that CEO will have to learn and have to grow and develop, and we will support that, and we will help them find the right people to support their growth, but we are investing in that CEO and that person's capabilities. That's team. Next thing is vision. So we invest, and again, I'd say we as Real Ventures, but I think that this is fairly consistent across most venture capital firms. That if you talk to them, that they are investing in very large. They want to invest in companies that are going to be very large. And specifically, I would say venture capitalists tend to invest in Canada. Large is defined as, say, they want to invest in a business that's going to be worth at least $100 million. If you go down to the Valley, they will say they will not invest in anything unless they believe it's going to be $1 billion company. They are swinging for the fences, and the mentality of investors is, I know that a bunch of my companies are going to fail, therefore the ones that I invest in need to be winners. And I think that's a fundamental difference between angel investors and venture capitalists. Angel investors are typically happy if you go into an angel investor and say, here, here's what we're going to do, and then we're going to sell the business in 2 or 3 years, and you'll probably make a 2x or 3x return, and it looks like low risk. Most angel investors will think, hey, that's great, terrific, and make a good return. Venture capitalists will say, no thanks. We're interested in businesses that are going to be huge. It's just their model. It's the way they're structured. It's the expectations of how they're going to invest from the investors that invest in venture capitalists. So in terms of vision, the real big thing is, hey, can this be a huge business? Typically that means not all industries, but typically that means going outside of Canada and building a large business. And then traction. So then again, traction, right? And we're seed stage investors, so we don't expect a lot of traction, but ideally we like to see product in market, some initial indication of product market fit. But again, I will say, product market fit, i.e. some customers, ideally some customers that have used the product, that are paying for the product, that you can say, hey, these customers are using this product, and if it's in a B2B, hey, they implemented this product. Sometimes it's just in pilot, but hey, this product actually works. But then again, I would say, it's those 3 things, and sometimes you've got an amazing team with a great vision, and the team matches the vision, then you can go a little bit less on the traction, right? But in other cases, it's the reverse. It's like, hey, they're really green team, young team, we believe in them, but they're really young, maybe straight out of university, so then we might want to see a little bit more traction, right? So it's all a balancing act, and it is really, it's a lot of judgment. So let me see what else I can say. I'm just trying to think of the most commonly asked questions. So that that's Real Ventures. That's what we do. I think the other thing is I would encourage you, if you are raising and if you're in the fortunate position of having multiple investors, that you think hard about which investors are going to add the most value to you. And I would encourage you not to simply say, oh, this has the most favorable terms, but which investors are going to help you as an entrepreneur take your business from one level to the next. And in that, it's everything from, just the mentorship, the access to talent, the access to clients, the ability to help you raise your next round. All of those things are extremely important, and I would encourage you to think about that if you are in the favorable position of getting to choose who your investors are. So with that, I'll stop talking and would love to answer any questions and talk about anything that you want to talk about.
That was awesome. I think that was a fantastic kind of intro. I'll seed the room with the first question, and then we'll open it up. And the first one is, I guess you talked a lot about teams.
Yes.
And you talked about tenacity. One of the things that often is not talked about in entrepreneurship is empathy. Yes. I was wondering whether you could talk about, because you've talked a lot about how you build winning teams, how empathy plays into building a winning team and also raising capital from your perspective. Absolutely.
So I think empathy is absolutely key. And I would say, empathy or EQ, right, the ability to lead. And we have seen so many times, that is often the distinguishing factor. I think, so I'm going to sneeze. Sorry. It's a huge differentiating factor, right? I mean, Toby from Shopify, he once said, I was listening to him once at an event that we were at, and he said, you know what? I don't really care as much whether they know the answer. I look more, and he's talking about hiring, he said, I look more what they do when they don't know the answer, right? And so that's not empathy per se, but it's empathy, I would say, is in terms of, it comes through in terms of how do you treat other people? What is your EQ? How do you go about the world? How do you view yourself and how do you view the world? And I think that the best entrepreneurs have a level of modesty that enables them to say, you know what, actually, I don't know all the answers and I need to learn, and an ability to work with others and build a team. And we find that, any entrepreneur who thinks they can do it all themselves is not setting themselves up for success. The best entrepreneurs, I would say, are, yes, they're confident in their abilities, but they are also know what they don't know, or are open to that feedback and that coaching, and understand and can build strong relationships. I mean, the more I work in business, the more I think it just comes down to people, right? And people relationships. And it's all about, selling your vision and getting people on side. And whether that is selling customers on your product, whether it's selling people the best talent to join your company, whether it's selling your current team in terms of why they should, why this vision is important. But then also the other way is listening to customers, listening to your employees, helping them feel motivated, helping them feel that, hey, this is a great place to work, and getting, just building that team.
Excellent. So I'll open it up to everyone here. Yes.
I'll stand up.
Okay.
So you talked a little bit about what you see as sort of early seed, right, or when a company's ready to 750,000 and up.
Yeah.
Investment. It's a pretty long, dark, lonely road from day one.
Yes.
Right? Can you talk a little bit about what do you look for anything in particular in what people did on that road as part of your consideration when you're looking to invest? Is there a channel that is better to follow that?
So absolutely. Again, there are all sorts of differences, right? So I'm going to pay. Absolutely, we look at how long the company has been around, how much money they've raised, and what they have done. So, generally speaking, if a company's been around for 2 years and they've spent a lot of money and they've had a big team and they really haven't accomplished that much, that's not so good. Now, there's a whole bunch of caveats. The one thing I would say, for instance, Shopify was around for 5 years, basically going along like this, and then they raised money and they took off, and look at where they are today, right? There's sometimes when companies are around for 3 or 4 years, and you meet with them and they say, well, you know what, we tried this, it didn't work, we tried this, we didn't work, we learned here, and now we're at this. It's like, okay, great, right? So that's no problem. But if a team comes in and says, hey, we've sort of been doing them more or less, they may not say this, but it sort of comes out, we've sort of been doing more or less the same things for the last long time, and we're sort of at the same spot where we were 2 or 3 years ago. It's like, ooh, not so good, right? We are looking for teams that show, okay, they're agile, they move quickly, they learn things quickly, they move quickly. That's really important. But I would say on sort of that long, dark road that it's great that you have like ventureLAB here. I met with a couple companies before. I know some other companies here are using not just ventureLAB, but other groups, whether it be DMZ or, just informal networks, and those are so important. And I think it's sort of flew through it, but a little bit, but I was CEO of a startup company before I joined Real Ventures. And I think one of the big mistakes I made is that I spent so much time working in my little tunnel. And I think that I would have benefited from getting out and meeting other people. And I think that's why it's so great to see so many people here. Because I think often it does feel really lonely in that sort of tunnel. And I think talking to other entrepreneurs, learning from them is absolutely is just so important.
Yes.
Hi, so I run a business where 90% of the revenue comes from my team delivering professional services. And as of last month, we finally closed our first licensing deal of a product that we developed, and again counts for maybe 10% of our revenue. Do you have any general advice for companies who are looking to transition from a services-based business to a product-based business?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, congratulations on your recent win. I mean, when you say advice, do you mean in terms of like the product or how to sell it?
How
Or?
do you move, from a professional services mindset to, selling products and, making sure that it's scalable?
Yeah, so we've seen a few companies like that, and often what they will look like at the beginning is much more almost consulting, and then they sort of really figure out what the companies want, and then they will sort of, okay, now when we understand what the companies want, what we can sell, now we're going to sort of create this product and more productize it, and then sell that. Sometimes it requires a different sales skill set. Although, frankly, it's often easier to go from the more consultative selling to a product. So, that's actually often easier than trying to go the other way, where you have a product and then you've got to be more of a consultative sale. So I think, so overall, I think that that's absolutely the right thing to do. And, it's a good way to go. Were you looking for any advice, any more specific advice in terms of like, is it how to deal with your team?
Mainly about selling. If we see something working, is there a way for us to, get to a broader audience, or, are there specific shifts in the mindset that we have to be aware of? Because our experience is mainly selling and delivering services.
Yeah.
Are there any gotchas that we need?
Not that I would say in general, so that you may move more. It sounds like your organization is going to move more from that sort of implementation maybe to doing more sales. I will say that one of the mistakes that I often see is that often a founding team looks like, hey, here's a technical person and here's more of a business salesperson. And one of the mistakes I see is people do not have as much, I'll call it, respect for the sales function. And so by that, what I mean is founders will say, oh, I've never sold anything in my life, but that's okay. I understand the product. I'm going to go out and talk to customers, and I'm going to get some sales. And sales, particularly enterprise, business-to-business sales, is a science, right? And now we're in IBM, I can say, because my father was an IBM salesperson for years. And so I grew up in a household where sales is a discipline. It's a ton to know. And we see too many companies, I think, where people just think, oh, sales, oh, I can do that. I can talk to people. And they go out and they start talking to people, and then they have good conversations, and they think, oh, great, this is great. We got all these leads, and I'm able to get in the door, and I'm able to supply the product. And then I'm able to talk about the product. And then you realize, 6 months down, those leads actually are still out there and they haven't closed it, or they think they had a contract and then they didn't quite realize that actually it needs to get approved because they didn't know what questions to ask. So I think that my suggestion to anybody who's in the room who's doing any business-to-business / enterprise sales is to make sure either you get the proper coaching or you hire somebody who understands how to sell into companies, because there is a real discipline, there's a way to do it, and it's not something that you can just sort of wing. You can't just wing it and figure it out on the fly.
I think to kind of just add to that, myself having done my own semiconductor startup and sold to LG and Panasonic, particularly if you're talking about expanding overseas, you really do need to have someone on the ground who understands those markets. So as a startup, if it isn't actually hiring those folks, one of the mistakes I often see is that people will think they have to build out their entire global team. And there are much more kind of efficient, agile ways to get those feet on the ground locally, to own those relationships locally, that will be able to really amp up your sales channel. And it is, as Janet said, really about understanding the market, because if you're shifting from a service to a product, the way or the people you might be dealing in the same organization might be completely different. So I think that's very salient advice. One thing, as I'm taking questions, which you did, so thank you for reminding me. If you could introduce your name and kind of the organization that you're with, that would be very helpful. Yes. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Raji. I'm working on a startup with my partner here. I'm being on a health and wellness site called the Health Simple. The question I had for you is that you mentioned during the early days you convincing a big company like eBay to take a chance to building a classified site. And there's already an incumbent in the industry, Craigslist. How did you go about back in that day to look at building a two-sided marketplace in the early days? You needed both sellers and buyers to connect on a platform. How did you track to kind of build it out? And you also mentioned that you say that you had gone to Europe to find like some software that I think could build software. So how important was it to build something proprietary? Because I know in today's world, like, you know, let's say an investor, they always ask, you know, what do you have patented in, what's it proprietary, what's your IP, how are you building a two-sided marketplace? What did you do back then to create maybe what you're doing you would recommend today for people starting out to build these two-sided marketplaces? Is having IP or patented things important today? Or is it just building a marketplace and getting traction the most important thing?
Okay, so two questions. So I'll answer the second question. So sorry, just to clarify, what was happening was eBay had actually built this classified site, and so eBay was launching it in Europe. So then I said, let me take that and launch it in Canada. So it was
the eBay product.
Yeah. In terms of what you build, like strategically, the strategic decision in terms of what do I sort of take as an open platform and what do I need to build myself, I think you need to look at it in terms of, okay, what is strategically important that you need to own and what can you outsource? And I think there are some sort of components or building blocks that you might be able to sort of get, quote, off the shelf, but other aspects where you want to say, hey, you know, this is important. And I think it so much depends on the business and how strategic is that, right? If your product, and I think generally speaking with tech businesses, you know, we want to see the tech in-house, right? Tech is so important that you need to have technical resources in-house. That being said, if you're like, hey, you know what? For this part of the product, we can just grab this over here, it's an open source something, and plug it in, and then we're going to build our unique tech, then that's fine. In terms of the two-sided marketplace question, so I get asked this a lot. I think the way I think about two-sided marketplaces is that you need to think about it on a very microcosm level, right? And so what I mean by that is, let's take Kijiji as an example, right? It's not about, okay, hey, how many buyers and how many sellers did we have on the platform in total? It's about, hey, let's say I'm in Halifax and I want to buy a dog. Can I buy a dog, right? And so what you need to do if you're building a two-sided marketplace is take it down to that level of, it's not about, hey, how many buyers and how many sellers in the macro. It's about at a very minute level. If I'm a buyer, did I find what I was looking for? And if I'm a seller, did I find a buyer? And so how does that sort of theory get implemented? Well, first of all, what I would recommend if you're a two-sided marketplace, again, I'm going to speak in generalizations, but you start, maybe it's in one city, one category, and you figure out, how do I scale the buyers and how do I scale the sellers? And you nail that, and you need to be very cognizant and looking at the data on a little level in terms of, okay, our buyers and sellers, right? It's not about, hey, how many buyers came in, and like, it's not if you look at the averages, you're going to be misled. You need to look at, okay, what items are selling, what items are not selling, and then look at what's taking traction. So just to sort of, you know, make it a little bit more real. When we got sort of down the road, after we were across the country, what we would do, and this was, I'm going to describe it manually, but it was actually a bit more automated. But every day we would look at the site and we would say, for every city, in every lowest level of category, how many items are listed and how many bids are being placed on all of those items. So for instance, we might say, oh, Halifax Pets, there are 10 listings for dogs in Halifax, and none of those listings are getting any bids. Okay, then we would turn on for that day the keywords on Google that we knew would drive dog buyers in Halifax to those listings. So like, you know, we would buy the keywords on Google. And then over here, maybe in Winnipeg for couches, we would say, hey, you know what, there are actually, I don't know, 3 couches that are listed and every single one is getting 10 responses. Okay, we need more couch supply. So we actually knew how to get the couch supply, right? And so it's that sort of level, and it's thinking about getting the supply and demand at a macro level and saying, okay, hey, what's taking off? Oh, we need more of this supply, we need more of that supply, and making sure that the customers, that it's like thinking about it at that micro level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, really interesting.
Okay.
So my name is Harrison. Myself and my partner here are building a shared economy platform for people that work in media, so sharing like high quality video and photo audio equipment amongst each other. And my question for you, Janet, is just obviously you have probably tons of ventures that come to you and ask you about working with them, or whether it's investment or advisory or whatever.
Yes.
What is it that really interests you today, whether that's on the product side or on a team? What really makes you excited about getting into an adventure and working with them?
So I think the biggest thing is sort of a unique insight or a unique product. And it's like, I see some companies where I'm like, okay, yeah, I've seen 5 of those in the last month. Well, okay, that's an exaggeration, but okay, I've seen a lot of those. Okay, it's the same sort of thing, right? But it's like, oh, okay, well, actually, this is really unique. I see where they're solving a unique situation and a unique problem. I think, so that's sort of on one lens. It's like, okay, they're solving a unique problem, or they have a unique lens in this, or there's something, a unique way to go about it. And I think that actually could be a huge business. So that's sort of the first thing, and then the next is team. Is this like really a dynamic team? That being said, overall as a fund, we are very focused on AI. And so we have some specific AI initiatives. We co-founded a company called Element AI so that we could learn more about AI. We can leverage that. They're actually a very close partner. We're owners in that fund, so that we can bring that talent of those top AI folks to help our portfolio companies. We believe that AI will transform every industry, and we view AI very much as a horizontal play. And what I mean by that is that every single company will need to figure out how to leverage AI, right? It's just like, I don't know how many years ago, right? And people were talking about mobile companies. Well, even way back when people were talking about internet companies, right? And which companies are internet, and no, every company is internet, right? So then mobile came along, and everybody's talking about these mobile companies, and well, no, every company had better have a mobile strategy, right? And it's the same with AI. Every company had better be thinking about how they're going to use AI. And so it's the same with and we look at that when we're investing in a startup. They don't necessarily need to have done everything and have all the AI, but they need to say, hey, you know what, here's my vision, and okay, here's how we're going to use it. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Thanos from NRC. So when you have somebody come to you, what would you give as guidance for a founder company that has interesting technology, but maybe reticent to disclose too much? How does somebody know what level of insight to give about their proprietary technology so that they're not revealing their IP in a way that's going to come back to them?
Yeah, so I would say so VCs, I was going to say do not, I never like to say it, but VCs don't sign NDAs. Right? Okay, maybe but bottom line is VCs will not sign an NDA generally because they just see too many things, and it's too hard. They can't sign an NDA, right? And so, my advice to you is talk about the problem that it's solving, right? And I think if you can disclose, I think investors hope, at least at first glance, are not going to care so much. Hopefully, they should give you the credibility that, okay, I'm going to assume that you have some secret sauce that does what you say you're going to do. So you can almost think about it like, what would you tell a customer, right? So it's like, okay, this is the problem we're solving. Our technology is built so that it can do X, Y, Z, or it can solve X, Y, Z. And then, particularly if you have customers that are then using that technology and showing that it actually does X, Y, Z, well, then that should provide, now at some point, maybe just before investing, they'll maybe want to get in, and then maybe at that point they'll sign an NDA, maybe, but it should be further down the road. I think initially, they should be caring about, okay, how do you do it? And hopefully that's something that you could reveal. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Janet, my name is Frank Bunn. I've started a new company, the assessment of the mobility of patients or subjects, a computerized vision technology, which we have. We've got 4 patents on it working. My question is, well, by the way, thanks for Kijiji, because on the side I've sold sewing machines and lawnmowers and antique cars. I love it.
Right.
It's fun stuff on the side. What I'm interested in is let's suppose I'm almost ready for 500 to 700,000. Let's suppose I could just get into acceptance. And let's suppose I also own all of the technology and the company at the moment. A very mundane question. If I was accepted into funding in this level, how much of my company am I going to lose?
Yeah, so generally, generally when we invest, we would invest, sort of, I talked about sort of the range, we would generally look to get sort of 10 to 15% of the company. This varies widely, but our rule of thumb is you should not give away more than 20 or 20, I shouldn't say give away, you should not sell, whatever, you should not give away more than 20 to 25% of your company before Series A, if you can avoid it. Now, the caveat is, there's always caveats. We see other companies, some companies will have to give away more, okay, sorry, not give away, but we'll have to sell more of their company early on, particularly if it is a very capital intensive business where you require a lot of capital before you show results. Then you're gonna have to raise more money and you don't have the results, so the valuation is not as high. But I would encourage you to think about, okay, how much money do I need to raise? The other thing I would say is when you're dealing with venture capitalists or whoever, it's the investors who price the round, right? So you go out and you raise, you're looking for this amount of money. It's the VCs who will price the range. It's not entrepreneurs who say, hey, I'm raising X and X valuation. It's like, well, okay, that's fine. That's your target. But it's like selling a house, right? You could say, list it for whatever price, but the reality is it's the buyers who are going to determine the price of your house. But so I would say, therefore, at the pre-seed stage, right? So if you're at the pre-seed stage, I would say, I wouldn't encourage, like maybe 10% of the company you want to be giving up. I actually get rather angry when I see entrepreneurs, particularly young entrepreneurs, who have raised an angel round and have sold like 40% of their company. I think, like, who were these angels who took advantage of this entrepreneur and took 40% of their company? Like, what the? And the issue, frankly, becomes that at a later stage, the Series A investors are not going to invest if they don't think that the entrepreneurs have enough skin in the game. Yeah?
And just to follow along that, at Series A and Series B, when those occur, and let's assume this is a company that has at least some sales.
Yes.
What do you see a group of founders coming out with at that point, the common holders coming out with that at the end of Series A and Series B? Just to give some, because it's one thing to say you emerge with 80-85% of your company still intact after a seed. What about after Series A?
So we typically see about 20% dilution at each round. It's sort of 20 to 25% dilution at each round. Again, it varies, but as a general rule, I think at the pre-seed, it's usually a little bit less, maybe 10 to 15%, again, depending, and then each subsequent round.
But if just using that as rough math, that would indicate that most entrepreneurs or founding teams should expect that by the time they're through Series B, they're now, the investors as a total group probably do own half or more
Exactly.
of the company.
Yes.
And probably have controlling interest at that point.
Yes. And that is why you need to pick your investors carefully, right? I think too many people view investors as, oh great, I'll get the money from them. It's like, I always sort of think, it's like, you can think of it on a sliding scale, right? And ideally you want to get investors that are going to add a ton of value. But at minimum, you want to get them in the middle, neither positive or nor negative. But you see some bad behavior. And US investors, I would say, generally speaking, are more prone to the bad behavior. And I think, again, I've seen bad behavior from everybody. From our experiences, US investors, the thing about Canada is all the investors know each other. And I know particularly at Real Ventures anyways, we're very strong in, we are not looking to maximize our return on any one deal. We are looking to build an amazing firm. And if we want to build an amazing firm, then we need to have the best investors want to work with us. In order to do that, we need to have a great reputation and we need to treat entrepreneurs fairly. And I think, so that is our belief. And I think a lot of Canadian investors realize, hey, the pond is pretty small. In the US, I think partly the mentality, but they can afford to. I mean, it's like a huge, if they upset some entrepreneurs, that's okay. There's other entrepreneurs around. But absolutely, I have seen some, quote, like not very nice stuff that happens, right? So you need to, as a CEO, you need to not only pick your investors wisely, but you need to manage them as well.
Gentlemen, yep.
So I'm James, CEO at ventureLAB, and I'm hoping maybe this is a great segue into this question, and I'm hoping maybe you could either dispel or confirm this advice that we've heard from multiple different entrepreneurs that have raised. And they said, figure out your metrics, figure out what you want to raise within the Canadian market, and really drill down to come up with a solid plan. And then arbitrarily double your ask and go to the US. And now that doesn't make any sense to me. That the logic isn't there. And they're saying you can, for the same amount of dilution you're willing to accept and the same metrics that you're basing your calculations on here, you can get double the money. And I mean, what's your experience with that, having worked and been in Silicon Valley and being?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say a couple things. First of all, it's true that the valuations in the Valley are higher. I don't think they're quite double, but I think maybe they are higher. That being said, it's very difficult to get anything prior to Series A from a U.S. investor, because at a seed, right? All investors want to be close to you, right? They want to know you're a young company. They want to be close to you. An investor in Silicon Valley who does not know you or does not know the founding team is not. Again, I'm talking in generalizations, there are always exceptions, but generally speaking, Silicon Valley investors will not invest in a company in the great GTA if they don't know anything before Series A. It's too early for them. There's too many amazing companies that are right next door that they're like, I'm not gonna do that. I know how much time it takes to invest in a seed stage company, and I'm not hopping on a plane every month. And I'm not willing to make that investment that far away. So I would say now, when you get to Series, so I would say for most companies at a seed, so probably for most entrepreneurs in here, getting money from Silicon Valley is probably not even an option, particularly if you don't have significant traction in the US. They don't even want to talk to you. If you got the best business in the world, and I've seen this with several of our portfolio companies, you could have the best business in the world and the best metrics, but if you're not in the US, they don't care about it. You don't exist as far as they exist. Again, I'm talking all generalizations, but and then in the later stages, say a Series A or something, I would say, generally speaking, yes, the U.S. valuations are higher, but we are seeing more, and this is like in the last 6 to 8 months, the Canadian investors are paying up, and a lot, it depends. But then I would also, I guess I'd say yes, the valuations, Series A onwards, tend to be higher in the Valley. But again, you got to understand who you're working with too. It's not just about the most amount of money. Yeah.
But is it just because of like a fundamental different mentality, or is it a different equation, like a different way that they're getting from the metrics and?
No, I think it's generally, the thing is that in the Valley, salaries are more expensive. Cost of living is more expensive. I hear this again over and over when I talk to U.S. felons. They're not as capital efficient. So what they look at, Canadian companies are much more capital efficient. So let's say you've done X, Y, Z, right? And then for the U.S. investor, a U.S. company to have done the same thing that the Canadian company, they probably have spent a lot more money. And if you're a Canadian company, you want to go from here to here, it's not quite going to, the U.S. mentality is, okay, if you want to get from here to here, it's going to like require more money, right? It's going to require more money. So their whole mindset in the U.S., it's like, you can think of it as it's like higher inflation, right? It's like an inflated, right? Everything costs more to build your business. It requires more money, higher valuations. It's like an inflated ecosystem. Everything's more expensive. Versus in Canada, it's not as much because the costs are lower, etc. Okay.
And I think it goes back to your point earlier, which is the investment partner that you choose especially early stage pre-seed, seed round, you wanna look at what your long game plan is for those VCs that you're partnering with. Who do they work with in the valley? Because that's going to be the best partnership outcome for, in terms of investment and how quickly you grow your business. I think that's actually.
Yeah, and I would say the advantage of getting a Canadian VC is they'll move faster to get a decision. You don't have to travel down there. They'll take you at an earlier generally in terms of your company development. And they may or may not be able to add more value. I think the other thing too that we have found with US VCs is, I mean, I have heard US VCs say, you know what, I have introduced them to companies and they come back and say, no, you know what, I don't think it's going to be worth more than $1 billion. I'm not interested. Right? Versus Canadians would say, oh, wow, $100 million company. I really see this going to be 100 million, 200 million. US VCs will not invest. I mean, again, generalization, I'm talking about the top tier VCs down there. They're not interested in anything. I mean, and part of the reason is because they have huge funds, right? If you have a $500 million fund, right, you need to be writing you need to have companies that are worth $1 billion, that you can own 10% out, so that otherwise, you think about, okay, maybe they own 10% and exits for $1 billion. That's, quote, only 100 million. Well, they've got a $500 million fund to say they're trying to triple that. They've got to get to 1.5 billion. 100 million doesn't really go a whole long way to get to 1.5 billion, right? And so if they're like, okay, I've got a 500 million, I've got to turn it into 1.5 billion, and they think, oh, here's this thing, well, it's going to make 100 million. It's not of interest, right? And so there's a lot of other factors. So I don't mean to go on, but it's sort of, hopefully that sheds some light or is helpful.
I'm cognizant of time, and I know
Okay, that's okay.
Okay, so let's take a few. Bhupinder.
Janet, I'm partner in a law firm, patent law firm, and I've invested in a few companies at the very early stages. And because of my background, I generally look for companies with very, very strong IP, registered, IP or registrable anyway. How much weight do you put on patents and trade secrets and other formal IP rights?
So I think it depends. We actually generally don't put a lot of emphasis on it. And the reason we don't, I think maybe it's the type of businesses. I guess I am worried, I was talking to somebody yesterday about this, about the cost to defend those patents. Yes, we will always say, hey, is it, what's the patent? And, do you have this patented? Yes, we'll probably ask them to patent it. But as I said, I was talking to somebody yesterday, a Canadian company doing well, and the US company sued them for patent infringement, and they spent $25 million trying to defend them. The company almost went bankrupt, right? And so yes, those patents are expensive, yes, those patents are important, but we also look for, you've got to be able to win in more ways than just going to court and defending your patents, because you could get sued, and even if you're in the right, you may not, if these big companies want to come after you, you may not be able to survive that. Does that answer your question?
Oh, it does, and that's not just my experience on both sides. We've had a lot of success owning patents and a lot of frustration.
Yes.
Believing in patents that ended up not being very valuable.
Yeah.
Hi there, Janet. My name is Yankee, and our company is openhouse.ai.
Okay.
My question is, you talked a little bit about finding the right investor for your company. Other than Googling, do you have an approach or best way to find that?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, I would say, hey, go out and talk to a bunch of VCs, right? Or investors in general. And then you'll get a bit of a feeling from meeting them. But the most important thing is to talk to their portfolio companies. And what I would encourage you to do is, if you can, you go on their website, you see all their portfolio companies, right? As if you know somebody. But I would also encourage you to talk not just to the portfolio companies that are doing well, but if you can, talk to the portfolio companies that did badly. And find out, how did that firm treat you like you when you're talking, how did that VC treat the entrepreneur when their business was not doing well, when their business was dying? Did they just say, forget it, I'm off to the next one? Or did they care about you? Did they help you? Did they support you? Because I think you learn more about anything. You learn more about people at tough times than in the good times.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah?
I'm John from
Okay.
So you talked a little bit about choosing your investors, right? And
Yes.
sort of trying to pick and so forth. And you get a bit of a mixed message, right? There's the whole numbers game. The more people you talk to, the more likely you're going to find the right person.
Yes.
Right? But by the same token, you want to try and choose the right person to talk to, and particularly in the Canadian market, you already identified that everybody knows everybody already.
Yes.
So now you're talking to a community that are talking amongst themselves behind your back, not on purpose.
Yes.
Because you're not in the room. How do you prevent putting yourself in a position somewhere along the way where you create a toxic field around your company or your brand within that community, and you don't even know it's happened, and you're still going trying to find somebody who's going to open the door and they've already slammed it?
Yeah. So I mean, VCs. I don't think they don't talk too much about companies. Unless, I mean, if they're both invested in the same company, then yeah, hey, we'll talk. But I mean, generally speaking, I don't talk too much because I'm either there. I just think that's not fair for the entrepreneur, right? Especially if I've already said no to an entrepreneur. I think I'm not going to say anything bad about them. Like, why would I do that, right? It doesn't help the entrepreneur. Like, it just. But I suppose if it does, how do you prevent it? I mean, I would say, that being said, you need to be 100% truthful, right? In all your interactions. Do not play VCs. So I can say they don't talk that much, but what I see, for instance, do not say that it's a VC, oh, I've got a term sheet coming. Particularly, do not say, I got a term sheet from X firm coming, if you don't really have it, right? I have seen entrepreneurs, they'll say, oh yeah, I've got a term sheet. I'm like, oh, okay, great. Well, we can't move that fast. Like, in all honesty and sincerely, that's fine. You know what? We can't move that fast. You go ahead. And then oh, well, actually, no, you know what? Like, don't lie to me. I'm not stupid, right? And so, I would say don't worry too much about that, but at the same time, whenever you're talking to anybody, like in anything, right, is just assume that they're talking and never try to play games with them. Yeah.
Yes. Hi, Jen. I'm Siddharth from Printex. So when you launched Kijiji, my question is, how did you get the first round of users?
Yeah, so, I mean, that's a good question. We just, we put the site up, and I think the key thing was that we looked at what got traction and then doubled down, right? And so, so what I mean by that is we launched the site, and then we saw, okay, hey, there's more activity. Sort of what I was talking about before, right? We saw, okay, where's that activity? And a core principle, and when we were building eBay, actually, the same sort of thing, right? When I worked at eBay in Silicon Valley, I had all these very early stage companies, and how do you get that initial traction? So it was the same sort of principles, and you look at, okay, what is getting traction, and then you double down on what's getting traction. And like, oh, okay, hey, let's just start really small. We've got some listings in this category. Okay, great. Let's start figure out how to get buyers, right? Let's start to get the flywheel going. Or, oh, look at this. We're doing, what are people searching for? Oh, people are searching for these things. Oh, we don't have enough listings. Okay, how can we go and get listings in that category, right? So it's very, again, at the micro level, to figure out what's going on and then try to get the wheel going that way. Okay.
Mackenzie from Treasure. You had mentioned before about younger teams needing to kind of prove themselves more than maybe teams that are more experienced.
Mm-hmm.
So for a younger team, what are some of those ways that they can make up for that experience that they don't have?
Yeah, so I think about it like, it can be anything, right? By proving themselves. Like, so for instance, sometimes we'll meet with a company and we'll be like, wow, you know what, this company, it's only, okay, let's take it, I'm talking young people. They're only 6 months old, and look at the stuff that they're doing. Look at the way that, the sort of chutzpah, right? Like, wow, you know what? And you start asking them questions, how did you get into this company, right? Oh, well, actually, and you're like, wow, this person, they're taking initiative, they're doing stuff. Right, so it's that, even if it's only 6 months, it's like, okay, do they have, that get up and go? And I mean, again, it's so much. It's just like life, right? I'm struggling with one of our entrepreneurs right now, and one of our founders, one of my other partners, that we were talking about how to help him, and he said, the problem with this founder is he's never had to struggle. I was like, yeah, that's right. He never had to struggle, right? And so you actually want to see people who've had to sort of struggle a little bit, right? And they've had to, or they tried this and this didn't work, and it's like, oh, okay, I get it, right? It's like, okay, this person is really, they're just street smart. They're driven. They iterate. They move, right? And so you can, even if it's only over a 6 or 8 months period, you can start to see that indications of that. Yeah.
Hi, Jenna. Thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure to listen to your stories. So it's not our first time, but I really appreciate that.
you just introduce yourself?
Sorry, Manan from IBM.
Okay.
So two-part question. I'd like to know if any of your portfolio companies are working in partnership with corporate innovation, if they're leveraging those out there, and if so, how the experience is. And the second part is, how do you envision corporate innovation as a value add to startup ecosystem? Dream scenario.
Yeah, so I think, so we have, I have overall been, positive in terms of how large companies in general, and I think this has changed over the last 12 to 18 months, how much more receptive large corporations are to working with startups. I was talking to somebody about one of our companies, and this guy used to be a key executive at Scotiabank. He's since retired. And he was like, oh, well, they'll never get into the banks if they haven't raised. Like, they need to have huge financial stability. They need to raise a ton of money. But they don't, right? And so it's like, I think that speaks to, and he was like, well, when I was at the bank, we would always, the first question is, how much money do you have at the bank? How financially stable you are? And we would never work with this startup. Well, you know what, now the startup is working with the banks. And so we see that all across, like, as well as with manufacturers and stuff like that. I think it depends on the organizations, but generally speaking, I think a lot of companies are much more open to working with startup companies, much more open to having a pilot, whether it be banks, some of the largest manufacturers, Magna, one of our companies is working with some of the auto manufacturers, and they're doing a lot more. We get contacted often by the corporate and innovation arms who will say, hey, you know what, we want to meet with this type of companies in your portfolio. Great, okay, great. We'll put together an afternoon for them. So I think overall the model is working well. Of course, there are the horror stories about the long sales cycle and things like that, but generally it's good, I would say.
Hi, Cheryl Giblon, Innovation York University.
Okay.
Working with an academic institution, with a university, a company can usually save 80 or 90% off of their R&D costs, and it's all non-dilutive work. Are the venture capitalists that you know of making use of this for their portfolio companies? Because I'm not seeing a lot of that happening.
So I would say, I think it's not the venture, whether the companies are doing that?
Yeah, but are they, it's hard for the companies to even know about that.
I think
once
that,
again, using the knowledge base of venture capital to advise them.
Yeah, so I don't think that there's a wide knowledge of that, but from the companies nor the VCs. Okay. So I think there's an education opportunity.
Thanks.
Okay.
I think we have time for, I'm looking at Rachel, do we have time for one or two more questions?
Here, we're going to get this guy.
It's up to you. It's actually up to you. So
okay, we'll have two more questions. But you seem like you've really got a question. So we got.
Sure. My name is Andre. I'm with Yumi. I want to go back for a second to the equity point.
Yes.
So you said that you should not give up more than 15% on a seed round. So that means if to get 750, let's say, you need a valuation of about 7 million.
Mm-hmm.
So that's normally not the case for seed rounds in Canada. At least I don't see this.
Well, so I think that.
So the valuation is like 3 million is a maximum, with 4 million. So how do you do that?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, in terms of the definitions, that's why I sort of is that the seed rounds, I would say the seed rounds that we're invested in, we are seeing those valuations. Now, the pre-seed, right, as you say, everything's changed. Like when we started 10 years ago, a seed round, we used to invest $250,000, and that would be their seed round, right? And maybe if they raised $300,000, and that would be a seed round. Now they're raising $2 million and calling it a seed round. So everything is shifting up. So you need to be a little bit careful on the nomenclature. But I think if you're raising, let's call it $300,000 on a $3 million pre, as an example, right? Then that would be considered a pre-seed round. In our books, that would be considered a pre-seed round in terms of how it's happening. And part, I'll tell you, the reason that it's shifting is that what's happened is the U.S. funds are driving this change, right? The U.S. funds are raising much more money. They've been successful, and they're raising much larger funds. As an example, so as a result, they need to write bigger checks. If you've got look at some of these numbers, but like $1 billion fund. But let's just say you have a $500 million fund. well, you have to be writing larger checks. And so as a result of that, Series A investors were raising it, right? A Series A used to be, $2 to $4 million. Now we're seeing Series A's anywhere from 7 to 25, 20, well, that's on the high side, but 7 to 15 million is a Series A. Right? But the metrics are also shifting upwards. So, for instance, if you're a SaaS company, it used to be $100,000 MRR was the rule of thumb. You need $100,000 in monthly recurring revenue to raise a Series A. Now that number is 250 to 300. Right? So everything's the nomenclature again. So you get. That's why I sort of think, you can call it. I was going to say you call it whatever you call it, but it's like think about it in terms of the size. And so, as I said, I would say if you're raising 250, 300, 350, 400, 500, that's pre-seed, and the valuation is probably going to be 3 or 4 million.
And last question. Answer that last one.
So my question is for a specialized...
Introduce yourself.
Oh, okay. Let me just get up as well. I'm CEO of a company called ATIC, an IoT Internet of Things company. So I wanted to know, let's say for a high-tech company, like specialized high-tech company, where's the best place for them to raise seed round?
So I think where are you located?
So right here.
Okay. Okay, then, sorry, I shouldn't have done that part. But, I would say from Canada. If you're in seed, you're probably going to be raising from Canada.
Is your question?
I mean,
Do you mean
or VCs, or is it type of specific
source
type
of
of VC, right?
Yeah. So I think that if you're, again, it depends on your stage, right? If it's sort of pre-seed, you're probably raising from angels. If it's sort of seed stage, a lot of the other thing about Canada, you're probably going to be raising from Canada. A lot of the Canadian funds, not exclusively, but generally speaking, are much more, well, actually, I guess the US, yeah. Anyways, but they're much broader, right, horizontally. If you're in Canada and you're focused on the Canadian market, I mean, there are some fintech-focused funds, but generally speaking, you've got to be pretty broad, right? If you're in early stage, I mean, you can't, as an example, there's not enough deal flow in Canada to say, hey, I'm going to do Canada seed stage advanced manufacturing. There's not enough companies, right? And so as a result, they're fairly broad. But that being said, within the fund, there's going to be different partners that focus on different things, right? So we have a partner that does a lot of digital health. We have a partner who really leads our AI stuff. I do a lot of marketplaces. I also do some bit of digital health, right? So as a result, there's different things, but I would look. Does that answer? Am I answering your question right? But you can also look at the portfolio of companies, as all on the website of different firms, and try to find out. Okay, do they have they made other investments that would indicate that they would be interested in this? Or if you're looking at angels, have the angel investors either made similar synergistic investments, and or do they come from that background that they might be interested in what my company does? Does that answer? No?
I think, to some level. I think maybe it's just go directly to our problem. So when we meet the customers, they get really excited because we really see the value of what it is that they're going to bring to market. But then because they're in the field and they know the problem point, they understand that. But then when you go to the investment community, because they're not from the specific field or from advanced manufacturing, they don't really see the value of what it is they're going to bring to market. So it's not like so it's literally, it's really see the value. So, when we went through like different groups of people, we realized that the investors who understand the market, can really see like the massive value of what it is that we want to do, like our customers. But then the majority of people, because the majority of investors, because they're very diluted in terms of their investment strategy, you can't really see it deep enough to understand what is it they want to bring into market. And the real problem is like, we're basically bringing in disruptive technology, which is like, it's literally disruptive, not by definition, but actually is disruptive. So then, we're sort of trying to position that, see, who we should go after, who understands that field. So,
right. So I would say, so one of the things, so yes, there's an issue of, hey, how do you find people who do that? The other way to look at it, though, is that, and this is something that I've sort of learned, being in VC, that I initially was a bit skeptical about. one of the most important things, and the most important things in raising around, is you need to be able to tell your story in a way that is extremely compelling and that people can understand. And that, like your whole, what we call the founder narrative, right? Or how you describe your company, how you describe what you're doing and what your vision is, and make it so that people can, anybody can understand it and appreciate what you're doing and realize the huge opportunity. That is extremely important. And it takes a lot of time. And I will tell you, one of our things that we do with our companies when they're going to raise a Series A is we will often, there's one guy in our firm who specializes in this, and the founder will go to Montreal, where he's based, and will literally spend a week with him. And they will work 4, 5, 6 hours a day to develop the deck. I mean, that's how much work it takes to develop that, as I said, that story, to really get at the essence of what is this company doing, how do you tell this story to somebody who knows nothing about the industry in such a way that in 15 minutes they can say, I get it, this is huge, and the team can pull it off. So that is a huge part, and I think that a lot of entrepreneurs underestimate how important it is to get that narrative right so that everybody can instantly understand it. And I think they also, it's really, really hard and really time-consuming.
I know we could go on. This has been fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us today.